Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Lord of the Rings Tale of Middle-earth spoilers. And today, it's apparently modern day. We got two of the best modern cards, hopefully from the entire set, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Lord of the Rings cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. And number two, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should mosey on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth. First up today, we got a new goblin, and it is a good one in Moria Marauder. So a 2-mana 2/2 goblin warrior, not a legend, which is a rarity these days. It is double strike, and it says whenever a goblin or an orc, which the orc text I think is mostly just for limited, but whenever a goblin you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. So what this means in practice is, let's say you have 10 goblins, and you swing at your opponent with all of them, and they all hit your opponent, you get to exile 10 cards from your library and play them all. This is a ridiculous source of card advantage for a goblin deck, and it really plays off the fact that goblins are really good at going wide. If you look at goblins, a lot of them are flooding the board with small goblins. That's kind of what goblins does, and this just works perfectly with that game plan. So if you want a comparison for this card, Prophetic Flamespeaker, but like way better. Prophetic Flamespeaker actually kind of an infamous flop. People thought this card was going to be really good during spoiler season, and then it kind of did nothing. But the big difference here, aside from just costing less mana, but the big difference is Marauder gives your entire team of goblins, or orcs, but goblins this ability, rather than needing to get in with Prophetic Flamespeaker or Marauder itself. Another comparison, it's kind of reverse Grenzo Havoc Raiser. Grenzo Havoc Raiser does the same thing, except it steals the cards from your opponent's deck, but Marauder's way more powerful. Like, you would rather be drawing cards from your deck than your opponent's deck, because your opponent's cards probably don't synergize with your Goblin Tribal plan, when your cards are definitely going to synergize with this plan. So if you want the downside case for Marauder, it's probably War Instigator, another 2-mana 1/1 double striking goblin that was really hyped as like a new take on Goblin Lackey, one of the best goblins of all time, that just fell completely flat. The problem is, War Instigator, it itself has to get in combat damage. Marauder doesn't even ever have to attack to use its ability. You can just attack with other goblins, so I think Marauder is way better than War Instigator. So what do you do with this card? Well, I think, number one, I expect this card to show up in Goblins in Modern and in Legacy. It might just be a one-of tutor target, because Goblins gets a ridiculous number of tutors, like Goblin Maiden, Bogart Harbinger, and other card advantage effects. But I think this is an easy one-of. Like, there's going to be situations where this is a game-winning effect. Not as good after a Wrath, necessarily, but on a full board, this can come down and close out the game. Or after a Wrath, if you can rebuild a little bit, it can help you rebuild your board and take over the game. So I think as a one-of tutor target, I would play this in Goblins in Modern or in Legacy. I also think this is a really interesting option for 8-whack goblins, one of my favorite budget decks. So Marauder in 8-whack, not sure if it's a main deck card or a sideboard card. The downside is it is pretty slow. If you've ever seen 8-whack in action, it is all about killing as fast as possible. It wants to be ending the game on turn 3 ideally, not just drawing some cards on turn 3, but 8-whack is really good at going wide. Thanks to cards like Gleeful Demolition, they can add 3 goblins to the battlefield for 1 mana. Marauders can be generating an absurd amount of card advantage in an 8-whack deck, so I think worst case, I would definitely consider this for sideboard slots in 8-whack, where you bring this in, and the idea is if you play against a sweeper deck, you can hopefully rebuild and then use Marauder to generate some card advantage and refill your board, because one of the things 8-whack is pretty bad at is winning after a Wrath. If your opponent can sweep your board early, it's hard to rebuild. I think Marauder might help there as well. The other place that this card is going to be absurd is in Goblin Commander decks. I think this is the easiest staple in Goblin Commander decks. I would play this in every Goblin deck possible, and it's going to be at its best probably in Krenko. Like, Krenko, maybe the best Goblin Commander, or one of the best and most popular Goblin Commanders. Its ability just makes so many goblins. It taps to make goblins equal to the number of goblins you control. So Krenko just snowballs out of control really hard with 1/1 goblins, and if you add Marauder to the mix, now all those 1/1s aren't just chipping in for a bit of damage, They're drawing through your card, finding your finishers, finding more goblins. So I think the Marauder has the look of a goblin staple pretty much across formats. Like I said, in 60 card formats, it might be a one-of because goblins has a lot of good cards already and it has a lot of tutors, so we can find one-ofs easily. But I think at worst, it's a commander staple, and I expect this to be tried in Legacy and Modern as well. We also got one of the most exciting cards, I would say, from the entire set in Forge Anew. So Forge Anew, 3 mana white enchantment. When it ETBs, you reanimate an equipment, return an equipment from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's already pretty exciting. And then it says, as long as it's your turn, you may activate equip abilities anytime you can cast an instant. So during your turn, you can equip whenever you want, and then you can pay 0 rather than pay the equip cost for the first equip ability you activate during each of your turns. This is a ridiculous Magic card. So the first thing, obviously, I thought of is, okay, what does this card compare to? Well, it's kind of trash for treasure, except you don't have to sack anything, but it only gets equipment. So 3 mana reanimation for equipment. That's actually pretty powerful in some decks. Then you get instant speed equipping, which is a really rare ability and a very scary ability in Magic, because what it lets you do is you can swing with your entire team, wait and see which of your creatures goes unblocked, and then put the equipment on that creature, and it gets even better. You get to equip once for free, kind of like Blainer Battlehammer, but you can equip to any creature for free, which is absolutely ridiculous. So Forge Anew, I think the most obvious home for this is in Colossal Hammer decks. It is built to be in Hammer time. Colossus Hammer, incredibly powerful equipment, 1 mana giving +10/+10, like one of the most powerful equipment in all of Magic. The problem is its equip cost is 8. So most Colossus Hammer decks, or literally all of them, are built around cheating on that equip cost, finding ways to equip it for free. Forge Anew is another way to equip for free, assuming it's your first equip for the turn, which it will be. It also can get a hammer back from the graveyard, which not only lets you beat counter spells and removal, but it lets you play through Chalice of the Void, which is kind of interesting. Your opponent play Chalice, you cast your Colossus Hammer, it gets countered, goes to the graveyard, then you just Forge Anew it back into play, and then the free equip instant speed mode is so frightening out of Hammer time. At first I was like, is this going to be worth it in Hammer time? But the combination of free equip instant speed and the reanimation mode, I think it is worth it in some numbers. So what this does is what we talked about before, like you play a bunch of your random Ornithopters and so forth, you swing with your entire team, and then you just wait to see how your opponent blocks and put the hammer with your free equip on something that's not blocked and probably win the game on the spot. So Forge Anew Hammer time, we'll see how many people play. I think if you're playing in Historic, if you're playing in Modern, this card's in the conversation, maybe some number in the main deck, definitely some in the sideboard to get through those hate cards, get back your hammer once it dies. So a really exciting new option there. It's also really sneaky good with living weapon style equipment. So like Cauldron Complete, for example, 7 mana equipment. The sneaky aspect of living weapon, though, is it creates a creature when it comes into play. So Cauldron Complete, you don't need a creature on the battlefield. It's essentially a 5/5 first strike trample indestructible haste creature. So with Forge Anew, if you're reanimating Cauldron Complete, you're kind of turning into a real reanimation spell. Unlike reanimating a Colossus Hammer or whatever, where you're gonna have a creature on the battlefield to equip it to, you don't need any creatures at all. And the same is true of like Banner Skull. In more recent arena formats, you can do this with 4 Mirrodin equipment, a Dragon Wing Glider, could show up in the Blade of Shared Souls combo decks to get a free equip and also get it back from the graveyard if it dies. So that's another really interesting way to build around it. I think if you're playing like the new Nahiri is the perfect living weapon commander because it lets you cheat equipment into play from your deck for free. And it works really well with living weapon because then you're again cheating creatures into play for free. Forge Anew just seems like a staple there as well. Obviously, really good with any high equip cost equipment, like Colossus Hammer, but in more casual formats, it's perfect for like Argentum Armor, another really strong equipment, giving +6/+6, and when the equipped creature attacks you to blow up a permanent. It's 6 to equip though, and 6 to cast. With Forge Anew, if you get Argentum Armor in your graveyard, you can reanimate it for 3 mana, and then equip it for free. You're cutting a huge amount off of this cost. So any high equip cross equipment are gonna love Forge Anew. In Commander, I think this is just a new staple for equipment deck. Like, there's a ton of support for these decks. There's a ton of cards competing for slots, but I think this card is definitely good enough that if you're playing any equipment themed deck, a new Nahiri, Surgwyn, Wylith, whatever, there's a million of them, Forge Anew is going to be in your deck. Like, it is just that good. So Forge Anew, one of the most exciting and powerful cards that we've seen from the Lord of the Rings set, not just for Commander, but also for 60 card formats in those Hammer Time equipment decks. We also got a pretty sad saga, Fall of Gil-galad, a 2-mana saga. It's a green card. Lore counter 1, scry 2. Lore counter 2, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. Lore counter 3, until end of turn, target creature you control gains. When this creature dies, draw 2 cards, and then that creature fights up to 1 target creature. So if you just read this card, it doesn't seem that bad. Like, scry 2, grow a creature, maybe draw some cards, maybe fight something. But sagas like this typically play way worse than they look. The first thing I thought of was the first Heroine games, one of the original batch of sagas. And the first Heroine games looks very similar, and it looks like a good card. Like, you make a token, and then you put counters on the token, and then you draw a couple cards, and then you get a gold token for some reason. But it always played way, way worse than it looked, because what often happens is when you go to lore counter 2 or lore counter 3, your opponent just kills whatever creature you were trying to put the counters on, and then the rest of the plan kind of falls apart. Once that creature dies, the third lore counter doesn't really do anything. You don't get to draw the cards, you don't get to fight. So I think this card is probably pretty bad. Like, if you're playing some sort of saga theme deck in Commander or whatever, feel free to run it. Probably okay and limited, I would say. The other issue with Fall of Gil-galad is the way it works is if you play it on turn 2, the second lore counter might not do anything. Like, unless you have a 1-drop, let's say you just play this on turn 2, on turn 3 when you get the second lore counter, you're not going to have any creatures on the battlefield to put the counters on, and then the third lore counter isn't going to do anything. So even though it's 2 mana, unless you have a 1-drop on turn 1, it's a card that you really can't play on turn 2 and get value out of. So Fall of Gil-galad, fine for like some sort of casual saga deck, but I actually think as far as like competitive play or even optimal playing Commander, it's actually not a very good card. They just never work out as good as they look. These sagas that want you to put counters on things and grow this one big creature, because the creature just dies way too often. And next up, we got a new legendary artifact in Horn of Gondor. So Horn of Gondor, 3-mana legendary artifact. When it ETBs, make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and then you can pay 3 and tap it to create X 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of humans you control. So Horn of Gondor, it's a really cool card, but it's also a really slow card for competitive play. So the good news is there are human decks in pretty much every format, from standard and alchemy and historic back through modern, in Commander, of course. So there's tons of home for this card, and it actually synergizes with a lot of the best humans. Like, Thalia's Lieutenant wants a lot of humans on the battlefield to put counters on them, and it also wants humans to come into play to get counters on itself. Champion of the Parish grows whenever a human comes into play. Easterling gets power based on how many creatures you control. Coppercoat Vanguard pumps all your humans. So you can see how Horn would synergize with all these cards. Like, the dream scenario of Horn is you like play a bunch of humans and then you Horn and then you activate it and make like 10 humans and everything's huge and you win the game and it's awesome. So the upside is there. The problem with cards like Horn from a more competitive perspective is they tend to be win more style cards. Like, if you're on an empty board, Horn is downright awful. Like, you play it for 3 mana and get a 1/1 when that 1/1 should cost 1 mana would be the going rate. And then the next turn, you pay 3 more mana and you make another 1/1. And then the next turn, you pay 3 more mana and get 2 more 1/1s. It's really, really bad when things are going poorly. Like, when you're behind, when your board's been wiped, Horn's going to be the worst card in your deck by a significant margin. It's really, really good when you're already doing well. When you already have a huge board full of humans and you're going off with Champion of the Parish and Easterling and Coppercoat Vanguard, then this is going to make 5 tokens, 10 tokens. It's going to be really exciting. The problem is, if you already have a massive board of humans, do you really need 5 or 10 more to win? So I'm pretty much ready to cross this off as far as a 60 card competitive card. I think it's just a little bit too slow. Could definitely see a sweet against the odds deck build around it where you just see how many you can make, how many humans can you make. On the other hand, in Commander, I think this card's going to be very powerful. It reminds me of Krenko Mob Boss. It's actually very, very similar. It's like the artifact human version of Krenko Mob Boss, where Krenko is one of the best goblins. It just snowballs so hard out of control. I think Horn of Gondor is going to do the same thing in a human deck, where you just build a big board and then double up your humans and really go off. It is, as I mentioned, pretty bad against Wrath, but in Commander, I'm not even sure that matters. Like, if you get Wrath, you get Wrath. I would play this in pretty much any human deck. It's going to be at its best in go wide humans decks, but most human decks are go wide human decks. That's kind of one of the gimmicks of humans. So if you're playing like Kyler, Catilda, imagine all the mana you can make by turning all those humans into mana dorks. Joda is maybe a little bit sketchy, but it is a legend, so you can cascade off it or cascade into it. Great with Easterling, Torrens. If you want to go full-on Universes Beyond Tribal, Rick Steadfast Leader really likes a lot of humans on the battlefield, a double anthem for humans. So I think Horn, easy inclusion in any human commander deck, probably a bit too slow when win more though for 60 card formats. We also got the War of Last Alliances, another new saga. So this one is a 4-mana white saga. First 2 lore counters, search your library for a legendary creature, reveal it, put it in your hand. So double tutor for legends, and then the last lore counter, creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. And the ring tempts you as a little bonus. So the last lore counter might just close out the game, although people are going to see it coming. Because of how sagas work and slowly build up over a couple turns, your opponents are going to know, okay, we got to deal with your board or deal with the saga before it gets to double strike, or you're probably going to kill us. So War of the Last Alliance, it's pretty slow. I mean, if you think about tutoring for legends, the going rate's probably Time of Need, 2 mana to tutor up a legend. Search for Glory's 3 mana, but it can also get sagas or snow permanents and gain you some life. So 4 mana to tutor twice isn't bad, but it's slow to get started. Like, if you're trying to do something early in the game with legends, it loses a lot of value. On the other hand, it might be about the right speed for legendary commander decks. That last lore counter is legitimately frightening. It's kind of a Cleaver Riot, which is a bad comparison because it's not a very good card. Maybe a Chroma's Will is a better comparison, but maybe not quite as good as that because that gives you a bunch of other abilities. But giving your team double strike is a good way to close out the game, assuming your opponent doesn't kill you first because they see that third lore counter coming. So I can see playing this, I guess, in legendary commander decks. It works really well with Joda, for example, being able to tutor up legends to Cascade or Azika, Dahada, Shanid, Radadrabic, Sisay. In a legendary matters deck, I think this is a fine option. I don't think it's like a super pushed option. Even though it tutors twice, it's still a 4-mana tutor. And like we talked about before, 2 mana is kind of the competitive rate for tutors usually. So it's a little bit slow, but in a commander deck, I think it's perfectly fine. So a cool card for Legendary Matters Commander, but not a super pushed one. Finally today, in the realm of lower rarity cards, we got 3 that are worth talking about individually. First up, Easterling's Vanguard, a 2-mana 2/1 human warrior. It's a black card. Then when it dies, you amass Orcs 1. So when it dies, it leaves behind a 1/1. This card, I think, could have some relevance for Pauper in specific. There's a semi-popular Pauper deck that's essentially a sacrifice deck. You're looking to sack creatures to carry and feed or a Bloodthrone Vampire to make them huge, and it loves creatures that leave behind a body when they die, like Nested Shambler, just a 1-mana 1/1 that when it dies, you make a 1/1 squirrel. That's kind of a staple of the deck. I could see Easterling's Vanguard being a part of the archetype. Yeah, it's 2 mana to get going, but a 2-mana 2/1 isn't the end of the world, and it leaves behind a 1/1, so it's a creature you can sacrifice twice. So I think worth keeping in mind for sacrifice decks, specifically in Pauper, which takes advantage of the fact it's a common. We also got a new tutor that people seem interested in, and I think might actually be pretty good, in Ringsight. So Ringsight, 3-mana Dimir sorcery. The ring tempts you. Search your library for a card that shares a color with a legendary creature you control. Reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. So at first glance, this looks like a tutor for a Legendary Matters deck. If you're playing 5-color Joda and your deck's all legends, this is pretty much tutor up any colored card. The downside of Ringsight, never going to be able to get colorless cards. Even if you choose a legendary colorless card, it doesn't have a color, so it doesn't work. So it's not going to get colorless artifacts. It's not going to get lands, but otherwise, this can snag whatever you want if you have 5 colors of legends on the battlefield. But I think Ringsight, because of how the ring tempts you mechanic works, might be a little better than most people realize. So if you go back to the ring that we talked about a couple days ago, the first level is making the ring bearer legendary. So this actually is pay 3 mana, turn a creature that you already control on the battlefield into a legend, and then tutor up a card of that color. So as long as you have any creature on the battlefield, you're going to be able to take advantage of this because you can turn that creature into a legend with Ringsight itself. So I think the best comparison for this might actually be a little bit more expensive and Dimir version of Diabolic Intent. Diabolic Intent, 2 mana, sack a creature, tutor up a card. Ringsight's 3 mana, you don't have to sacrifice a creature, and tutor up a card of that creature's color. colors, so maybe not quite as flexible as Diabolic Intent, but it's definitely a huge upside that the creature doesn't have to get sacrificed. And if you actually look at the most popular tutors in Commander, there's really two big ones. Demonic Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, those are like in their own level. And then actually the third most played black tutor is Diabolic Intent. That's the third on the list. I think that Ringsight is in the next tier, a little bit behind Diabolic Intent, but not that far behind. And it does have a massive, massive upside that these first three tutors we're talking about, Demonic Tutors like $40, Vampiric Tutors like $30, even Diabolic Intent after being reprinted is still kind of expensive. So I think that this is going to be a really, really nice budget tutor option. It should just be a couple bucks. It's only an uncommon. It's got a couple hoops you got to jump through. You got to be in Demir colors. But I think if you're in the colors, this is a really nice budget tutor option for Commander decks. We also got a random uncommon legend that might make some waves in Modern in Rosie, Countess of Southlane. So Rosie, 3-mana 1/1 legendary halfling peasant. When it enters a battlefield, you make a food token, and then when you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. So why is this random 3-mana 1/1 legend exciting for Modern? Well, it's a combo piece with Scurry Oak, and maybe you've seen this combo before, but Scurry Oak, when you put a counter on it, you get to make a squirrel. So the combo here is you have Rosie, you have Scurry Oak. You put the counter from Rosie on Scurry Oak, which is going to make a 1/1 squirrel token. That's going to trigger Rosie to put a counter on something, so you put it on Scurry Oak and make a squirrel token, and that triggers Rosie and counter on Scurry Oak. Essentially, with both of these cards, you get to make infinite 1/1 squirrel tokens, which will hopefully win you the game. And this is a combo that's existed before. We've actually played versions of it before. You can do the same thing with Ivy Lane Denizen. The big deal here, though, is that Rosie's only 3 mana. The big problem with Ivy Lane Denizen is it's 4 mana, so you can't actually get it with Collected Company, but now Rosie is replacing Ivy Lane, but it's 3 mana, so you can Coco into it, which might mean this deck has another life in Modern. I think it's certainly worth evaluating. Now that you can get both of the pieces on the cheap with Coco, you can assemble this combo pretty quickly, and in theory, making infinite squirrels should win you the game. Otherwise, we got a bunch more uncommon legends that you can check out over on MTGpreviews.com and a ton of just draft chaff filler style stuff. But again, if you want to see all these spoilers, you should definitely head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Lord of the Rings spoilers for today. So what do you think about today's batch of cards? Can these new Modern cards actually make it in the format? Is Goblins going to get a new piece? Can the combo actually take off? What are you most hyped about for Commander? How good is our new free equip enchantment? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more Lord of the Rings Tales from Middle-earth spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, and I will talk to you soon. Did you miss yesterday's spoiler video? Well, you can find it right here, and if you're in the mood for some Magic gameplay, maybe check out yesterday's Against Odds, where I tried to build the saltiest deck ever in Historic Brawl.